Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. Today I'm joined by a special guest, Robert Siciliano, one of the nation's most trusted voices on cybersecurity, identity theft, and fraud prevention. Robert is a private investigator, certified speaking professional, best-selling author, and the creator of the Strategic Human Firewall. You may have seen him on CNN, NBC, MSNBC, Fox, or The Today Show, helping millions of people understand how cybercriminals actually operate, and more importantly, how to stop them. In this episode, we're tackling two critical threats facing affluent families today: why wealthy individuals are prime targets for cybercrime, and how AI-driven scams like deepfakes and voice cloning are making fraud more believable and dangerous than ever. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marc. Happy to be here.
So you often talk about the myth of it won't happen to me. Why is that mindset considered dangerous?
Yeah, so we, as humans, right, are what is considered an interdependent species. And what that means is we, need each other. We depend on each other for our survival. We would not survive unless we procreate and, to continue the species, right? That said, as an interdependent species, in order to function, our baseline needs to be trust, which means that we have to trust each other. There's an underlying trust that we all have for each other that says, hey, I am good, I expect you to be good, and therefore, we can trust each other and we can procreate. Like, that's just kind of how it works, right? Knowing that, there is about 2 to 3% of the world's population, and I've been doing this now for 30 plus years, and I've come to this conclusion that probably about 97% of all the people that you ever meet in your life are worthy of your trust. 97% are trustworthy. They're good people, good-natured, good-hearted, they're essentially normal. And there's about 2 to 3% that are what we would consider sociopaths, psychopaths, essentially hardcore narcissists that don't experience empathy, sympathy, guilt, or remorse. The medical community considers them antisocial personality disorders. And so, knowing that this is what's going on, this is what I speak to, right? There is a significant portion of us, that 97%, that don't really truly understand basically that 97% versus 3%, the bad actors out there, and that if they kind of acknowledge it to a certain degree, they'd be like, well, I don't really think that that's going to ever happen to me. I don't really want to think about those things. I just want to, not have to worry about that. And essentially, harm is not going to happen to me. Like, they function in a certain level of denial. Like, a lot of people just do that because security is kind of like a thing that you kind of worry about. It's like fearful. It means like bad people might come out to get you. And nobody ever wants to think or believe or even frankly acknowledge that bad things would ever happen to them. Denial is one of those things that it's kind of like this wonderful human trait that we possess that works with us when it comes to living in a relatively, topsy-turvy, chaotic world. Denial allows us to function. It just does. But when it comes to security, I don't know that it really helps us all that much. Meaning that if we deny that the existence of bad actors, and if we deny that we kind of have to recognize risk to a certain degree, then you're making yourself extremely vulnerable to that 3%. You're making it easy for them. And what you're supposed to do is engage in basic security awareness training, engage in I recognize risk, engage in I'm going to do these basic things to reduce that risk to protect myself and my family. And if you understand all that, then the likelihood of something bad happening to you significantly reduces because you become what we call a hard target. So, long answer to your very simple question.
But then how does that person that is in denial, how do they go about knowing that they're in that group that is in denial, and that I guess that you can say the training or the understanding, everyone should have that, but how do they even know that they're executing that behavior that makes them more at risk?
So that 97%, I usually qualify them, like in my live presentations in front of my audience, by asking them a series of questions. Like, the first question might be, how many of you lock your doors, right? And not a lot of people lock their doors. It's interesting, like I work with realtors all the time, and realtors will tell me, like, some of our homeowners, like when we sell their houses, they don't even know where their house keys are. They've never even seen their house keys. They haven't seen their house keys in 30 years, And then how many of you have a home security system? And you'd be surprised, less than 20% of the population has a home security system. And then when I start probing them, regarding various questions like, well, why don't you have a home security system? The answer is often, well, I don't have a home security system because I don't want to live like that. And I say, well, what does that actually mean? And they say, well, I don't want to live in fear. I don't want to have to worry. I just want to be free. And that right there is like a telltale sign that you might be in denial, Because in that same line of questioning, I might be saying, well, how many of you think you live in what is considered a safe neighborhood? And usually I get 95% of the room raises their hand and say, I live in a safe neighborhood. And here's the reality behind that math, And I'm not here to say, you live in a violent neighborhood. That's not what I'm doing here. If you understand the word safe by itself, safe in baseball, you're either out or you're safe. It's an absolute, right? And if you live in a safe neighborhood, that means that nothing bad has, does, or ever will happen. I live in a safe neighborhood. It's safe. Well, not really. I mean, it's every neighborhood, something bad happens eventually, right? When you watch the 6 o'clock news and something bad happens in a neighborhood somewhere, something tragic happens, violent, whatever it might be. And the local news channel comes in and they knock on the neighbor's door. And the neighbor, she kind of hangs out in the front of the door, and the journalist puts the microphone in her face and asks, so what do you think about what happened? What does that neighbor often say? And that was a question. What do they often say?
I wasn't expecting this, or I didn't see this, this doesn't happen here. That
doesn't happen here. Yeah. They always say the same thing. They say that because nobody ever wants to think it can happen here. Those things don't happen here. Well, they do. That living in denial is very natural. It's very normal. It's what most people do. It's the reason why I have a job. Once you understand that about yourself, you realize, okay, I might be functioning in a bit of denial, And then I ask another question, and this is actually true. I have 22 security cameras. And so when you hear okay, this guy's got 22 security cameras, what might be your, understanding of what my disposition might be, my worldview, my outlook, how I navigate the day? Guy's got 22 security cameras. He must be what?
Pretty skeptical, pretty nervous, pretty negative about things that could happen to him.
What else? What's another word? Paranoid. Because when it comes to security, most people look at security as a form of paranoia. Oh, he thinks people are out to get him. He's worried. He lives in fear. That's why he does that. We equate security and paranoia essentially in our culture to the degree where we resist security because of it. Because paranoia, in effect, is a mental health issue. And when somebody possesses that, if you've ever spent any time with them, their life is essentially out of control. They are at odds with their universe, that they are truly in belief that people are out to get them. And that's a horrible sense, a horrible feeling. And I have family that experience this, And it's very difficult way to live. And that's just, their mental health issue. But we equate security and that together. And so as a result, most people don't engage in the basic practices of locking their doors, having a home security system, setting up something called a password manager, doing all the basic things that you're supposed to do to become a tougher target.
And just kind of going back to that, to use an example that I know, in my area, there's a lot of car thefts, car burglaries. And a lot of times it's the person leaves their key fob in the car. You hear about it, that, my car got stolen, I left the key fob in the car. Yet, and this is not new, it's been going on for a while, yet people still leave the key fob in the car. Then is that an example of denial?
That is truly denial. I mean, it's just How many cars are broken into because the car is not actually being broken into? It's just unlocked.
Yeah.
Everything's stolen out of the glove compartment, out of the center console. Look at what it boils down to is, and I don't mean to offend anybody, it's essentially just irresponsible behavior is what it boils down to. That denial leads to irresponsibility. Look at, I don't put my seatbelt on because I'm paranoid or because I worry. I put my seatbelt on because it is the smart thing to do. I put my seatbelt on fundamentally because it gives me control over that vehicle. Should something swerve or someone swerve in front of me, right? In order for me to maintain control over that vehicle, I got to stay tight in that seat, in front of that steering wheel, in front of that gas and brake. That seatbelt is my security in that vehicle. And most people don't engage in much more security than their seatbelt because they don't want to think it can happen to them. But we put that seatbelt on primarily because we're forced to. The car won't stop beeping at you unless you do. And automobile dealerships and our government know this, and they've forced it upon us, which I think is a good thing. Because if something swerves in front of you and you lose control over the vehicle and you end up like on the sidewalk and there's a family of 4 walking on that sidewalk because you couldn't control your vehicle because you swerved and got thrown into the passenger seat because you didn't have your seatbelt on, that's a horrible thing. So we do these basic things often because we're forced to, not because we want to or we think we need to.
Yeah. When we say that wealthy individuals or high net worth people are targets, what actually does that mean in practice? What kind of scams or frauds are they being exposed to?
Yeah, excellent and important question. So I'm sure as a wealth manager, you have some basic understanding of the $100+ trillion of wealth that is being transferred between the baby boomers and the greatest generation and the rest of us. So if anybody can just Google the $124 trillion of wealth being transferred, it's the greatest transfer of wealth that's ever occurred in the history of mankind. And that is between essentially our parents or some of our grandparents and us, Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, Gen Z, and so forth. So take my father, for example, 78 years old, baby boomer, worked his entire adult life in the union, blue collar guy, pension, annuity, compounded interest, all his investments, Roth IRA, the whole thing. Put his money away. Worked, right? Early on, when he was growing up, that's what they were taught. That's what they did. They put that money away, paid off his house. His house is maybe 25 minutes north of Boston, where I live, worth probably $1.5 million. 20 minutes north of Boston, that's the market, And so between that, pension, annuity, his investments, compounded interest, probably worth $3-4 million, right? Never actually had that discussion with him, but, based on what I know, yeah, right? That money, eventually, transfer of that wealth to maybe, hopefully, me, eventually, right? Because he's not going to live forever. Neither am I, neither are we, right? And so that transfer of wealth is happening right now. That money is the target of the bad actors. That's the money that they're going after. So understand that my dad, the baby boomers, greatest generation, right? They are the most moneyed on the planet. They are the most trusting left on the planet. They are essentially the least technically savvy when it boils down to it, no offense. And, like all of us at some age, cognitively declining. So they're the biggest target right now. They have the most money, least technically savvy, cognitively declining, most trusting. And on top of that, human beings, 25% of us experience loneliness from the moment we wake up out of bed. And throughout the day, we experience loneliness. That is our default, 25% of us. That's normal, that's natural. Google it. It's always been like that, will always be like that. I know in my own life, I experienced a lot of loneliness when I was really young, in my 20s, let's say. Okay. And then I met my honey. I'm happily married. I'm lucky enough that we have a good relationship and I don't experience loneliness. But let's just say your spouse passes away, right? Let's just say, something happens. And so loneliness is a normal, natural thing. When we are lonely, we sometimes make bad decisions that lead to risky behaviors. And that might mean getting one of those wrong number text messages, right? We get them all the time. Hey, Robert, are we meeting for lunch today? And I'm like, I'm sorry, who's this? Are we supposed to meet for lunch? Oh, I'm sorry, and she responds with, oh, this is, Janet. And she sends a pretty picture of a Janet. I'm sorry, who are you? She says, and the dialogue begins. That wrong number text message, if you don't already know it's a scam, is designed to lure you in, to send you down the rabbit hole. And whoever you're communicating with on the other end, they know 25% of us are lonely. And that a good portion of us, the baby boomers, the greatest generation, have a lot of money. And that all they've got to do, starting with this, is engage you in a dialogue. And that dialogue might go on 6, 8, 10 communications back and forth a day. And they know after a week or so, when they've been, just kind of building that relationship with you, building rapport, just basic stuff. They're not even talking about love or money or anything. They're just talking about, hey, how did you sleep last night, dear? What are you doing today, dear? And throughout the day, they're sending you pictures of them at yoga, what they're having for dinner, their grocery shopping, basic stuff, just to build that relationship, just to build that trust. And what happens after a week or two of engaging with, Janet over here, if you're lonely, the walls go down, the trust goes up, the loneliness dissipates, and now Janet says, hey, what do you think about cryptocurrency? I've been investing in it. I'm making 80% of my money. Would you be interested in me teaching you how to do that? And before you know it, Janet becomes the puppet master, and you, that lonely individual, maybe wealthy, become the puppet. That's why wealthy individuals need to pay attention, because this is a real thing. And it's not just people that are, say, single or solo. I've seen married couples fall into this, because in some situations, you could be lonely in a married couple, or just, interested in making some additional money. And when you see this opportunity because somebody texts you or emails you, you're like, hey, let me give that a shot. And you might even tell your spouse about it. And before you know it, the two of you are into it. I met a couple down at the Villages in Florida that this happened to. I was hired by a wealth manager to do a program because his clients were getting bombarded by various scams, and some of them falling victim. One couple, they lost $600,000 to that scam. And when I met the wife, just looking at her, she was just broken. You could tell. They mortgaged their home. They lost everything. They were going bankrupt in their mid to late 70s. Just brutal.
How does it go from maybe 10, 15 years ago where you're getting an email from a Nigerian prince and you look at it and you're like, haha, pretty funny, to sophisticated schemes?
AI, man. Couple things. Number one, people often say, if these criminal hackers would just take what they knew for good, they could cure cancer. And I'm like, yeah, no. Here's the deal. These criminal hackers, first of all, they're sociopaths, they're psychopaths, they're hardcore narcissists. They could care less about curing cancer. That's one thing for sure. And on top of that, they make more money, and sometimes in a day or a month, than many of us will make in a lifetime. So there's just so much money to be made by people who are gullible, vulnerable, lonely, moneyed, not technically savvy, cognitively declining, and so on. And then the big part of it is they've taken, over the past 15, 20 years, fraud, scams, crime, and they've organized. Yeah, they're sophisticated to the point where they look at fraud as a business. They recognize that there's just so much money to be made in scams and fraud. When you organize to that degree and you use all the technology at your fingertips as a fraud organization, and you understand that there's just so many victims out there, and coupled with the fact that in the past 20 years, there's been about 175 billion records compromised, data breaches. So all of our names, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, billions of our passwords are in the hands of criminals. And so they have databases of who we are, access to our social media pages. They know that you are a mariner, that you like boating, that you might be a member of Boat US, and so they'll send you an email that looks like Boat US, and they'll get you to click links and download stuff and compromise your passcodes, and they just infiltrate every aspect of our lives, and they will pose as all of these entities that we may do business with, that we're interested in, and so forth, right? And then they use our phone numbers, our email addresses to come at us with all these various ruses. And with artificial intelligence, voice cloning, which is perfect. You cannot tell the difference between real or fake voices. You can't. It's impossible. Humans don't have that ability, okay? On top of cloning our likeness with face overlay, whether it's a pre-recorded clone of us or a live feed of us where it takes my face and my video and it adopts it and puts it over somebody else. There's no telling the difference in most cases. The technology is not 100% as far as the face overlay goes, but it's really good. And most of us may not be able to tell the difference. The technology's there, but not consumable, where we all have access to it, like in an app on, your iPhone, but it's there. And all of that, coupled with being organized and treating fraud as a business, makes us extremely vulnerable, because the majority of us don't want to think it can happen to us, aren't doing the basic things to protect us or our families, and ultimately are looking at these various frauds all day, every day, and not really knowing what to do because we haven't thought it through.
I want to talk about a person that's lonely, not tech savvy, maybe starting to have some cognitive decline. How do they combat, or how do they prevent some of these things from happening? The question's kind of a two-part. You gave the example of the person who that tech stack came and they established a trust. So how do they combat that? And then also, how do they combat some of the voice deepfakes or the video overlays? I heard hearing a lot of the first type, someone building trust over text, or someone impersonating, I'm a member of TC or this bank and I need to help prevent fraud. I hear, unfortunately, a lot of those. I haven't heard too many yet of the deep fakes, and I'm sure that's coming. But how can someone prevent that from being a victim of that?
Yeah. So I think certainly consuming this podcast, right? Just talking about it, incoming information that makes us aware of these various risks, I think is really important. And then sharing that information with others, because while you and I are having this dialogue and people are consuming this, and they're coming to realize that there is risk out there that they need to be warned against and they need to be cognizant of, so that when the phone rings, when you get those emails, when you get those text messages and so forth, you have a basic understanding of, what that risk might be, what the intentions might be of the person on the other end, and understanding that it's highly unlikely that, you're going to get a wrong number text message, that this is a person you're going to develop, an intimate relationship with that isn't a scam, right? I mean, it is a scam. There's just no getting around it. It's highly unlikely that you're going to be on Match.com or any of these dating sites, and in the first, day, you're going to find your mate for the rest of your life, and after a week, they're going to profess their love to you, and, it's just like the match made in heaven, and it's going to actually be real, without you actually, physically meeting them and spending time with them, and it's all virtual. Like, that just doesn't exist. Scammers are on these sites 24/7, 365 as bots, robots, and they know exactly what to say and how to pull your heartstrings. They know exactly how to lure you in. And after a week, you're like heads over heels already. That means like they've strategically and professionally done that to you on purpose to get you to basically, fork over your investments with them eventually. So recognizing that, like, too good to be true and all this stuff is like, I really need to be cognitively aware, because I am, one of those targets that they might go after, because I am, this single adult that has investments, and I need to be conscious of that, and I need to protect not just my investments, but my heart. Okay, I think that's really important. So recognizing risk comes with, understanding what those risks are. All these inbound communications, don't automatically just trust. By default, it's what we do. And if you understand that about yourself, that you're a good person, you're part of that 97% of people that are worthy of others' trust, that you're just good-natured, that your default is to give the benefit of the doubt, if you know that about yourself, kind of, sit back and as you are navigating life, don't just automatically trust. Be a bit more skeptical. And that's not a bad thing. It's called situational awareness. It's a good thing. Situational awareness is like wherever you are, no matter what you're doing, you're out and about, you're walking the dog, you're heading down the street, you're driving. Your responsibility to yourself is to pay attention to your environment, to make sure that people are driving as they should, that they're not a risk to others, that as you're walking down the street, you don't trip on something or step in something for that matter, that if anybody's paying unwanted attention to you, you're cognitively aware of that because, you're paying attention to your surroundings. In the physical world, that's what you're supposed to do, situational awareness. Well, it's the exact same thing when you're online. Text messages, emails, phone calls, people knocking at your door. Heck, just always be aware of what's going on because it's smart, like that seatbelt. It gives you a bit of control. And don't just default to trust, gullible, vulnerable, and so forth. And all of this, right, is natural and normal. Exercising awareness and engaging in a bit of risk management may not be as natural and normal to most of us because, of course, we trust and because, of course, for the majority of your life, you haven't worried about these things, maybe because nothing bad has ever happened and or you've just never had a conversation like we're having right now that says, hey, I think it's, a good opportunity to pay that much more attention so that I don't become a target, that I become a tougher target by exercising the basics of what I call risk management.
That awareness, that skepticism, who spearheads that for someone like that? This example we've been talking about, someone in their 70s or 80s. Is it the child who goes to their parent and says, you can't do this, you should do this, you should, not be as trustworthy, be skeptical? Because that 70, 80-year-old person, I don't know if they're listening to podcasts. I don't think they're going online and saying, let me research how to be more vigilant or how to be more skeptical kind of in my daily life. How do they get that first dose of awareness of this is what you shouldn't be or should be doing?
Yeah, there are certain people in our lives that we need to engage in what might be considered an uncomfortable conversation, right? And these uncomfortable conversations are, hey, you're spending a lot of time online, you're on various social media sites, occasionally you're on these various dating sites, and I know that you generally know what you're doing and so forth, and just being supportive in your dialogue and not hammering them with you got to be aware of this and you got to be aware of that, just having a general tactful, what might be considered an uncomfortable conversation that kind of leads them to a certain level of awareness. Have them listen to this podcast, right? And have conversations with them in regards to this is what those various scams look like. And at some point, certain people in your life that may be more or less vulnerable, I've got a 94-year-old mother-in-law that we pay very close attention to what she's up to and who she's donating her money to and what she's purchasing with her credit card and so forth, and what she does when she gets snail mail and what she does when the phone rings, and just kind of, having these conversations with her on a regular basis to monitor what she's up to, having a certain degree of, I say control, but that might not be the right word, but maybe, being a co-signer on various checks that she might write or loans that she might get, or just, having a understanding of her finances to the degree where we have as that, son or daughter or spouse, a level of, access to, so that they're not engaged in wiring money, writing big checks, giving out sensitive information that could eventually put their investments themselves at risk that ultimately might fall on that loved one, that sibling, that child, and so forth. So, I think it's important that we are functioning as protectors of those that we have a certain level of responsibility for.
You mentioned earlier about the dark web and all our information and passwords, all this is out there. How does someone approach that? How can they be more secure in their data, or is it just, it is what it is? The data's out there and there's nothing that can be done about it.
Well, there's two parts to what you just said there. First of all, as far as the dark web and the data being out there, there's really not much you can do about the fact that it's out there. It's kind of like, water's wet, the sky is blue, chocolate is yummy, your information's on the dark web. That's just the fact of life. But there is something that you can do. And what I tell my audiences is, like, for example, and I'll ask you this question, if you know, and it's a highly likelihood that your passwords or your password is on the dark web, how would you make your password useless to a thief?
Change it.
Exactly, right? How else might you make your password useless to a thief?
Use one password to access one thing instead of having one password get them access to everything.
So you have a different password for every account.
Yeah.
Correct. So change up your passcodes and use a different passcode for each account. And there's one other way, an additional way, that you could also make an existing password useless to a thief. Two-factor authentication, right? So two-factor authentication, of course, is when you log in, username, sometimes an email address is the username, and then a passcode, whatever that might be, and then an additional second factor, which generally is like a text message you get to your phone. That two-factor authentication makes whatever password that might be on the dark web useless to the thief. So you should change up your passcodes. You should never have the same passcode twice. And you should have two-factor authentication for all your accounts, even after you've changed up your passcodes. So the idea behind making the dark web data useless to the thief is, change up your passcodes, add two-factor authentication. Your social security number is likely on the dark web too. How would you make that useless to a thief? You either invest in identity theft protection and or what I recommend is getting what's called a credit freeze. So a credit freeze is that extra layer of protection that you would initiate by contacting all three credit bureaus, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. And once you make contact with those three credit bureaus either over the phone or online by logging in and creating an account, you now have the ability to freeze your credit. And basically what that means is going forward, your credit now is frozen. At any given point in time, if you want to get a loan, refinance your house, get a new credit card account, and so forth, you have to temporarily thaw your credit by going to the credit bureaus, temporarily thawing, right? Just logging in and going through a basic process of temporarily unfreezing your account so that you can apply for that loan, that credit card, that refinance, and so forth. And then it automatically refreezes at a designated date that you choose, because in the dashboard at the credit bureau, it gives you that option to unfreeze at a certain date and time and refreeze at a certain date and time. And so that credit freeze makes your social security number useless to a thief. So identity theft protection, credit freezes, password changes, two-factor authentication. Also, as far as passwords go, consider what's called a password manager. A password manager is a tool. It's a software tool that you download, and it attaches to your browser. It's like basically like a plugin, and so it's like a link. And once you have a password manager, it facilitates having a different passcode across each account, changing up your passcode. And I'm not worried about the password manager being hacked. The low-hanging fruit is not the password manager getting hacked. It's your information on the dark web that the bad guys just download.
What's going back to the credit freeze? Is there a reason why, by default, everyone's credit is not frozen? And it's the reverse, and you actually, if you want to use it, you actually have to make that call and unfreeze it.
It should be frozen by default. I've asked that question myself 1,000 times. The reason is because the credit bureaus and basically like your Fortune 1000s have lobbied against your credit being frozen across the board. We live in what we would consider a credit-driven society. In a credit-driven society, there's a certain level of commerce that relies on instant credit. And the idea behind not freezing your credit by default is that that instant credit brings in billions and billions and billions every single year. And if credit was frozen by default, it would just cut all that money off. And so retailers, others, lenders, don't want your credit frozen across the board because they feel and believe it would gum up the system of instant credit. And they're kind of right. I could care less. I want everybody's credit to be frozen across the board because that's my concern.
Always comes down to money. Well, Robert, this has been an eye-opening conversation. The reality is wealth today doesn't just need to be grown and preserved. It actually needs to be defended and protected too. For listeners who want to learn more about you, get a copy of your book, or contact you directly, where should they go?
So, Mark, I am online at protectnowllc.com. Again, that's protectnowllc.com.
Perfect. We'll link to that in the resources section of the show notes. Thanks again, Robert, and thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Don't forget to follow the Agent of Wealth on the platform you listen from and leave us a review of the show. We're currently accepting new clients, and if you'd like to schedule a one-on-one consultation with our advisors, please do so at bautisfinancial.com/call.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.